have anxiety, right? Like clinically diagnosed anxiety. And that anxiety, I mean, it comes out in a bunch of different ways, of course, but especially in language learning. And I have dealt with anxiety and language learning for a really long time. And I recently had a conversation with another language learner. I was really surprised by how heard they felt. That, they had never, they've been learning languages longer than I have. They've been teaching languages longer than I've even been learning them. And I was really surprised to find that she had felt alone. In this video, I want to talk about my language learning anxiety and what that looks like in a lot of language learners. Some tips that might be helpful for you because, language learning is hard enough. It's even harder when you have like that little voice in your head that's like always questioning what you're doing, your ability to do things, comparing yourself to others, all sorts of things. If this is your first time here on this channel, hi, my name is Jamie. I am a language coach, and my favorite thing is to take a non-BS, realistic, real-life approach to language learning and normalize the things that nobody else seems to be normalizing, that I struggled with for so many years, for so long. And I want to make it easier for other language learners who have also struggled with these things so they don't have to struggle with them anymore. And in this video, that thing is going to be anxiety. Anxiety does a lot of things in life, and especially in language learning. It makes you constantly question what you're doing. Are you using the right app? Are you spending enough time? Are you, learning quickly enough? Are you learning the right things? Are you using the right things to learn the things? If you spent money on an app, are you using it enough to, validate the expense, the cost, whatever? All sorts of things like that are super noisy in your mind. And language learning is difficult enough as it is. And, of course, there's also so many people online who will talk about, their method to learn language and how they learned a language so well and how they did it so easily. And that comparison that happens naturally because of it is really killer. We have this comparison in our minds already. Our anxiety is constantly comparing our language learning and our experiences and our abilities to other people who, we don't even know and we don't even talk to. But when, people put themselves out there on the internet talking about how they learn languages, and then you start second guessing. Am I doing something wrong? Is, what I'm doing right? Am I, studying hard enough, studying long enough, all sorts of things. Most people on the internet don't really talk about a realistic idea of what language learning looks like. It's glamorized. It's, talked about in such a way that like it's a magical thing. And honestly, I do believe that being able to speak and communicate in a foreign language is pretty magical, but the journey to achieving that level of a language is not magical. It's hard work, it's consistency, and working on days when you don't want to work, studying on days when you don't want to study, studying things that are hard and like your brain fights you on, and like things that are really difficult, and like having the motivation, dedication, confidence, ability to work on things that are a giant pain and are really hard to accomplish. That's not talked about, and that's made so much more difficult with anxiety. If/when you do get past that and you conquer those voices in your head, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, but you conquer those little voices, and then you start making some progress, and then some new voices pop up. Voices like, am I fluent enough? Am I able to communicate? Like, do I sound like an idiot? And am I using the right words? Am I using the right conjugations? Am I like pronouncing correctly? Can people tell that I'm not a native speaker? And are people laughing at me? And are people like, do people think I sound like an idiot? Do I sound like an idiot and they're just too polite to say anything? And it's honestly really terrifying when you don't know, when you've never experienced it, and also when other people aren't talking about it and they're just saying, oh, go have conversations. But it's not always that easy. It's, especially when you're just starting out with language learning, it's not always for everybody as easy as just like throwing yourself into a conversation and just doing it. Anxiety, it really holds you back, and you might get in your car and drive to a language exchange, and you're sitting there in the parking lot, and then you can't beat your anxiety beats you. And so you turn the car back on and you drive back home, and you just kind of like disappear because of this like fighting you have in your head where you don't think you're good enough. Your anxiety tells you that you're not ready. Your anxiety tells you that, you're gonna get lost, and what happens if you forget a word, or what happens if you misunderstand, and all these things. Like, me saying them out loud sounds ridiculous, honestly. Listening to myself talk about this, it sounds totally ridiculous, but at the same time, I know these are thoughts that I've had for years and years and years, and I've had to put so much work into conquering and like proving wrong and shutting down. And I know so many language learners deal with this kind of anxiety too. This anxiety comes from so many different things. It comes from, fear of failure. It comes from, if you've gotten laughed at before, if you've been bullied in school, if you didn't do well in school, and you have this preconceived notion in your mind that you're not good at learning new things, that you're not smart enough, that, you have learning disabilities that you feel are gonna hold you back and make it impossible because you've never seen anybody with ADHD, with dyslexia, with, I don't know, whatever mental illnesses pop up, with depression, who learn languages. You don't ever hear about that because it's not glamorous, right? It's not glamorized. And so not only are you stuck by your own brain chemistry, not only are you stuck with these thoughts that your brain is giving you and, making you think and feel, and, it's so hard to differentiate between what's real and what's your anxiety, much less that you've never seen anybody else talk about this. And you think that, nobody else in the world has ever had these thoughts, and everybody else is just confident, and, everybody else just waltzes into language exchanges and talks to tutors and doesn't have like anxiety attacks before every conversation. I have definitely felt that way, and I've definitely held my anxiety in silence. If you felt these things, please let me know in the comment section. I'm here. I've experienced all of these things and more that I don't even have time to talk about in this video, honestly. So how do I turn that around, right? I mentioned that these are things that, I've done a pretty good job at conquering, and, it's easier some days than others. It's not always totally easy, but what have I done? What can one do to help with this language learning anxiety? Well, the first step is awareness of when it happens. This isn't just general awareness of hey, I have language learning anxiety. This is also, hey, in this specific situation, I feel anxious. I feel like I can't do it. I feel afraid to make a mistake. I feel like I am the least skilled in the room. I feel like everybody else is speaking so much more fluently than me. This is a thought that I have all the time. The first step is acknowledgement and awareness, and saying okay, I'm feeling these things, and I know that these aren't real. I know this isn't real. I know my brain is trying to convince me that this is real, and it's doing a pretty good job. But I know that it's not real, and I can do something about it. The first step is awareness. If you're not aware of it, if you don't know when it happens, then you just accept it as your reality. You accept it as this is the way that your brain works, and you accept it as this is how my thoughts work. This is how language learning works. Then once that awareness happens, we can think about changing it. And that looks different to everybody, and it looks different to all situations. Depending on, if it stems from a previous experience you've had, or if it stems from some skills you have or don't have, whatever it comes from, this looks different for every person, every situation. But as a general rule, I would recommend working on being more gentle with yourself, being less critical of yourself. If you find yourself talking to yourself in negative ways, critical ways, judgmental ways, really invite you to make the effort to shift that thinking. If you find yourself saying, oh, I'm not good enough, just make the effort to switch that thinking and Fair warning, you're gonna feel like you're lying to yourself, and that's okay. Eventually you keep doing it enough, you'll convince yourself, in my experience. We are our own worst critic. Even if you don't have anxiety, even if, you don't have, any of these problems, we are our own worst critic, just like globally. Everybody is. So keeping that in mind, also that nobody is as confident as you think they are. Everybody who looks confident, they have insecurities and they're afraid of things that you don't know about. That's just across the human condition. Everybody is insecure about something. Everybody struggles with anxiety in some situations. Just because they're not talking about it doesn't mean it's not there. We're just used to not talking about our struggles, especially our invisible struggles, because, it's so easy to say, oh, just get over it. People say that. I'm not gonna say it because I know it's not that easy, but people will definitely say that. Another thing that you can do is just straight up talk about it. Just breaking that silence is really a big deal. Being able to connect with somebody based on that, based on this thing that you thought you were alone in, being able to connect with somebody else who also thought that they were alone in this, is really powerful. That inspired this entire video, honestly. Talking to somebody who thought that they were alone in their language learning anxiety. I promise you, you're not. I really invite you to reach out to somebody like a language learning friend. People commonly experience these things, but people do not commonly talk about these things. And then just remember that just like language learning, anxiety is not a straightforward process. Some days you'll really succeed and the graph will go way up top, and then some days it'll feel like it's going down. And that's just a normal part of progress. It's not about the short-term progress that we're looking at. We're looking for the long-term progress. And even if it feels like you're losing and you're going backwards, just trust that you're not. I know that's easier said than done. Some days will always be more difficult than others. So don't let the more difficult days stop you from waiting for the easier days. And for those really bad days, if you need to take a break, if you need to step back from your language learning, do it. If it's too loud, if your anxiety is too loud, just take a break. I give you full permission to take a break. Mental health is so much more important in language learning than a lot of people think about. Language learning is all in your mind. It's training your brain. You're not training your body to do anything. It's all in your brain. So if your brain is not healthy and flexible and relaxed, you're gonna have a really hard time making progress in your language learning. Your mental health needs to be a priority. If that means stepping back for a day, for a week, and taking care of your mental health, do it. Your language will always be there. The thing that's been really helpful for me and for my clients is to address limiting beliefs. I find that a lot of language learning anxiety stems from limiting beliefs. We believe that we're inherently, too old to learn languages, or, it's too late, or we're too busy, or, we are in a city or state or country that's, wrong, or, we have to be somewhere else geographically, physically, in order to learn languages. I found that to be a big, big factor in things like language learning anxiety. If you click the link below in the description, as always, to join my free training, I talk about that. I talk about, that's the first thing that, very first thing that I address with my clients, because like I said, if your mental health is not healthy, whatever. If your mental health is not there and open and available for language learning, there's nowhere to go. So I'd recommend that for sure. And above all else, remember that you're not alone. If you want proof that you're not alone, take a look at this video. I did the entire video in Spanish and I avoided it for a very long time, and I'm still not comfortable with it, honestly. I still have so many anxious thoughts that come up. Like, I know that a lot of, polyglots, they have videos where they're speaking like 17 languages and it's obvious that they're like reading a script. I had an outline in that video, but I didn't like read from a script, and I'm so anxious that people are going to think that they call my bluff and like, oh, you're reading from a script or, you know, whatever. But I'm not, and that was a really hard video to make, honestly, and it was super vulnerable. But I invite you to watch that video and not feel alone. Otherwise, be easy on yourself, and I'll see you next time.